Raise the flag.
Light the cauldron. We declare the game's Odyssey open.
Welcome to the Games Odyssey podcast, your home for stories of glory from Olympia to now. I'm Jonathan Jordan.
And I'm Sarah Patton.
And today we're doing our first athlete profile. Sarah, I'm really excited about this episode. I'm not going to lie. You know, we've gotten to cover the 1896 games now, and we've gotten to cover the OG Olympics. And yes, we did do a profile on Pierre de Coubertin and the other people who helped revive the Olympics, but we have not yet actually done a profile on an athlete. So we're going to not completely leave 1896 quite yet. We're going to highlight an athlete from those games, and we did kind of introduce this in the episode, but we're going to talk about the life of Spyridon Louis, who was the Greek runner who won the first ever international marathon race. Sarah, before planning for this episode, had you ever heard of Spyridon Louis before?
I feel like I had seen his name written down maybe when reading about the Olympics in 1896, but I did not know much about him at all. What about you?
I've read parts of his story before, which is part of why I wanted to start the podcast, is I was already reading things about him and other athletes from back in the day and was like, man, someone needs to tell this guy's story because it's really interesting. But I think his story really encapsulates a lot about what we love so much about the Olympics and seeing these underdogs kind of just come out of nowhere and make a name for themselves and establish a legacy. So I just felt like it was fitting for the first athlete profile to talk about a Greek athlete. And Spyridon was just the perfect fit for it.
Yeah, we do not have highlights today. We're just going to tell you his story, or Spiros. We're going to call him Spiros because that's what his friends and family called him. And I think we could call ourselves his friends, right? Can we do that?
Yeah. I mean, I would like to call him a friend, even though we've never met. But before we tell his story, you know, I realized we probably do need to kind of catch people up on where the idea for the marathon came from, because this was something that you and I have talked about before, and then I ended up cutting it out of an episode. So it makes sense that we actually should probably just put it in here since we're talking about the marathon a lot. And we should just go ahead and talk a little bit about the history of where it came from, since it will establish the context of why his win in the marathon was such a big deal, even though the Olympics themselves were not a big deal yet. The marathon was a brand new event that was established for the revival of the Olympic Games, but it was inspired by ancient Greek history. So it was not a part of the OG Olympic Games, though the actual Battle of Marathon did happen while the OG Olympic Games would have been going on. It was thought up by a French linguist by the name of Michel Braille, who was also friends with Pierre de Coubertin. So there is a connection there. He didn't just show up one day and say, hey, I've got this crazy idea for a race. He was in the circle of people who were trying to bring the Olympics back. Now, his idea was completely simple in concept, especially if you're not planning to actually do the race yourself. But a long distance race based on the legend of Phidippides, the Athenian soldier and courier who ran from the Battle of Marathon to the city of Athens, approximately 25 miles away, to announce the Greek victory over the Persian army. And then he dropped dead. I mean, Sarah, that definitely sounds like something that should be relived, right?
Yeah, totally. Nothing to be concerned about here.
Yeah, it does always kind of boggle my mind that someone would say, wow, this guy died running this distance. We should get a bunch of other people to run that distance and see
Mm-hmm.
what happens.
Well, and I
Oh,
know
goodness. Okay.
you and I both have ran that distance, so I'm happy that we survived.
Now, remind me, have you, how many times have you run a marathon and when did you do that?
I've only done one full marathon. I've done a few halves, but I've only done
Okay.
one full marathon, and that was in 2014, I believe, in the spring of 2014 in Oklahoma City.
Okay. Gotcha. So I've done two. It's been quite a while. My first full marathon was in 2012. It was the Dallas Marathon. And then my second one was in let's see, it would have been March of 2014. And that one was over in Irving here in the Dallas area.
Okay.
Now, that marathon was really interesting for me because we did it as part of an adoption fundraiser for our older son. So, Sarah, I may have to send you some of these pictures because this might be worth putting on the Instagram for people to laugh at.
Oh, I know what pictures you're talking about.
The fundraiser. Okay, you've seen them.
Yes.
I didn't know if you'd seen them, but yeah. So the concept was that since I was already training for a marathon and we were in the middle of the adoption process, that if people raised a certain amount of money for our adoption, then they could pick something that I had to wear during the race. So during that marathon, that was when I fulfilled my obligation to our fundraisers, and I had to have wardrobe changes during the race. So I actually, two different spots, I had to have people stationed with things for me to change into because, I mean, people were incredibly generous and enough of our fundraisers raised the requisite money to be able to pick something for me to wear. So I ran part of the race in a tutu. I ran part of the race with a cape, which was not great for for a lot of different reasons. One person made me wear these sunglasses where there was this like mustache thing dangling down on it. So it kept hitting my lip, you know, with each step that I took, which was really annoying, but it was all worth it to help bring our older son home. So yeah, I'm going to have to find a couple of those pictures so we can put it up for everyone else to enjoy. But anyway, let's talk about the Battle of Marathon, since that is where the race came from. Now, the Battle of Marathon was particularly significant in terms of Greece's history. It occurred in either August or September of 490 BC. And like we talked about in our first episode about the OG Olympics, the Greek city-states were not particularly unified. That's part of what made the ancient Olympics such a big deal, because that was when they got together and celebrated their common Greekness. But when Persia was planning to invade Greece in 490 BC, after a long period of tensions with various Greek city-states, this was another one of those rare occasions where several of the city-states decided to band together and fight back. Now, primarily this was Athens and Plataea, but there was some support coming from Sparta in the latter half of the battle. So yes, this was a very unique situation because this was not something that happened often, since usually the city-states were fighting against each other, not with each other. Not only that, but they were successful in this Battle of Marathon, even though the Persian army was significantly larger than the Grecian forces. So it's a little difficult to know the numbers because, shocker, there weren't any reporters there at the time to take a head count. But estimates from historians usually number the Greek forces around 10,000 and the Persian forces anywhere between 100,000 to 300,000. So whichever way you want to dice that, that's a huge differential between between military forces. Yeah. So according to the legend, because with Greek history, it's legend, it's myth, they all kind of combine together. After the Persians were defeated in the battle, they didn't completely leave. the Persians were planning to regroup. They wanted to sail to a different spot of Greece and try to attack again. So it was really important for the Greeks to send word back to Athens about the victory so that preparations could be made for the Greeks to also regroup and prepare for Persia's counterattack. Now, it's estimated that, assuming Phidippides was a real person, because this is where it gets a little fuzzy, it's estimated that he was born around 530 BC, which means he would have been in his early 40s around the time of the battle, thereby establishing a tradition of men around that same age becoming obsessed with running marathons. Upon arriving in Athens, it's said in the legend that Phidippides went to the magistrates, and according to the Greek writer Lucian, he said, "Joy to you, we've won." And then he died. Lucian, the writer, was a satirist, so we might need to take that story with a little bit of a grain of salt, Mediterranean sea salt. Now, other versions of the story say that he simply cried out, "We win!" which in Greek is Nikomen. And you might recognize that's very similar to the name Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, who, as I think we've talked about this before, is featured on Olympic and Paralympic medals. So you heard it here, folks. Nike has been sponsoring runners for a long, long time. The historian Herodotus, so he has a version of this as well, and he argues with that traditional account a bit. He says, no. Phidippides didn't actually run from the battle to Athens, but instead he was sent before the battle from Athens to Sparta to request military aid from them. So from Athens to Sparta, that's a distance of 240 kilometers. That's 150 miles for those of us who use miles. So, it's a fair hike. And Herodotus says that Phidippides, who was a professional career runner, he ran that distance over the course of 2 days.
Wow.
Which I'm not even sure what to say about that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you know anyone who does ultra marathons. I know a guy who was really into ultra marathons for a while, and he would do some of these events where it would be over the course of several days. And it wasn't even really about winning. It was just about seeing if you could actually keep up the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
But they would have to take, short nap breaks and things like that because they'd be running for 5 days straight or something insane like that. But anyway, so he covered that distance in 2 days. He went and he talked with the Spartans about joining in to help defend Greece from the Persians. And then he ran that same distance back to Athens so that he could join up with the troops, because that's what you want to do after running 300 miles is also go fight in a battle. So, yeah. It sounds healthy.
Completely.
Yeah. So Herodotus, in his version, he goes on to say that the Spartans were in the middle of a religious festival. So when Phidippides got there and said, "Hey, we need your help fighting against the Persians," they said, "Well, we can't send our troops until the end of this festival, but we will join in at that point." So it's his mission that is credited for the Spartans joining in for the latter half of the battle, which did bring the necessary reinforcements for them to push the Persians back to the sea. So his mission was a success. Now, Herodotus also says that Phidippides, when he was on his way back to Athens after meeting with the Spartans, that he ran into the god Pan along the way. Just a typical Tuesday in ancient Greece, running into a god along the way. And that the god Pan happens all the time. Yeah, absolutely. That's, again, no big deal. But Pan promised victory for the Greeks, which was a message that Phidippides carried with him back to the troops, which helped boost troop morale, because then they weren't worried about the number of Persians, right? Like, hey, Pan has already promised we're going to win this battle. We just have to go and do it, right? So good confidence building for the troops, whether it was true or not, I suppose. Either way, Phidippides is a big part of the story. He ran a long way. Whether it was before the battle, whether it was after the battle, kind of doesn't really matter. That is where the story came from. And so we mentioned before how in the 1800s there was a revival of interest in ancient Greek culture and history, and of course sports was catching on. So we see this captured perfectly in an 1879 poem by the English poet Robert Browning. That poem is called Phidippides, and he relays the traditional version of this story in that poem. Now, that poem, we're about to come full circle here, that poem helped inspire French linguist Michel Breal, who was friends with Pierre de Coubertin. So here we go. Came right back to the beginning. So he read this poem. He got the idea for the marathon during the planning of the revival of the Olympics for the 1896 games, and said, hey, we should make this a thing. So that's the background for us to understand why the marathon was created in the first place, because unlike some of the other events like javelin and discus and the athletic events, no one was doing the marathon. This is where it came from. But speaking of marathon, Sarah, let's talk about that a little bit. The city and kind of what happened at the actual Olympic Games.
Yeah. All right. So it was decided that the city of Marathon would serve as the starting point for the marathon race, a distance of about 40 kilometers or 25.8 miles, which you might realize is a little bit shy of the current standard length of 26.2 miles. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the 1908 London Games. Because Greece was hosting and people there were really excited about the marathon, they actually held a couple of trials before the games. Now, the other countries didn't have to hold a trial. It was just one of those things where you could sign up and do it when you got there. And then, according to some sources, as many as 3 men died while training for the marathon trial. So still, the marathon's still getting people at this point in time. And but, YOLO, I guess. But yeah, so 3 men died.
Yeah, I mean, apparently 3 people dying isn't a reason to carry on with the trials and with this new event that's been created.
Yeah, keep going.
But anyway,
no big deal.
So the first ever competitive marathon was held on March 10th, 1896. That was a month before it would be run in the Olympics. And it would serve as the official trial for the Greeks. Because as you just mentioned, people there were really excited about it. Other countries, like you said, just show up and enter because if you're crazy enough to do it, why not? But there with Greece, they kind of needed to narrow it down a little bit. So in that first trial on March 10th, there were 12 runners who entered, but the winner was a man named Kyrillos Vasilakos, and he completed the course in a time of 3 hours, 18 minutes, which, not shabby at all. That's faster than either of my marathons that I've run, so hats off to him. Now, the other 2 spots from that trial were taken by Spyridon Bellicos, who we'll talk about a little bit later on, and Demetrios Delianis. Now, it seems like from the research I did that they had only planned on that one trial and selecting just those 3 athletes. But Greek officials were really eager to stack the competition in their favor. And unlike today, where there's limits in how many athletes you can send for the Olympic Games during the trials, they decided to hold a second trial just a few days before the Olympics were even going to begin. So at this second trial, the winner was a guy whose name is just documented as Mr. Sorry, I'm going to butcher this name, Mr. Lavrentis. And literally, I do not have a first name for him. I looked for it. And in all the documentation, for whatever reason, he didn't want to tell people his first name, I guess. So he was just called Mr. Lavrentis.
I respect it.
Yeah, so he completed the course, coming in first in that second trial in a time of 3:11:27. So he did it 7 minutes better than the winner of the first trial. So I'm sure the Greek officials were thinking, hey, this is a great idea. We're gonna get the cream of the crop. We're gonna absolutely find the best people we can. Now, technically, entries into the games were actually closed at this point, but being a host country comes with its privileges, I suppose. So yeah, the officials went ahead and they added a few more names to the registry. So they didn't just add Mr. Lavrentis to the roster. They also included Spyridon Louis, who had finished 5th in that second trial. So yeah, so just to kind of reiterate, they picked the 3 people from the first trial. And then, if my research is correct, they picked another 6 from that second trial.
The actual marathon race was held on the afternoon of April 10th, 1896, with a group of 25 runners traveling the marathon for the start of the race, but only 17 runners representing 5 nations actually started. Of those, 9 would finish. 8 of them were Greek runners. So their hefty little tryouts paid off by stacking the field.
Yeah.
Now, there was almost an 18th runner, an Italian man named Carlo Airoldi. He had traveled about 1,000 miles on foot, mind you, from Italy to Athens, just so that he could compete. But he was disqualified before the race started on the grounds that he was a professional athlete, and this violated the Olympic code of amateurism. Turns out he had more experience at long-distance racing than any of the other competitors because he'd run several 50-kilometer races and been paid for those. So yeah, he'd been getting paid to run. So sorry, Carlo and Italy, you just didn't make the story, which just really stinks after going that whole way on foot. He probably would have been a pretty good competitor.
Yeah, because I don't think they really advertised what the qualifications were for being an amateur versus a professional. Because, again, we've said this before, we'll say it again, the Olympics were not a big deal yet. So it is kind of sad that he heard about this and was like, great, this is going to be an awesome opportunity for me. And he walked that entire way just to find out, oh yeah, you can't be in this race. So I feel a little bad for him, honestly. But anyway, the Greek officials ended up entering 13 runners out of the 17 who competed. So I guess there were a few other people that they added in there here and there. I'm not sure how that happened, but it did. And the other nations who entered the race just had 1 runner apiece. So those other nations were Hungary, France, the US, and Australia. But by and large, it was mostly a Greek field. The only one of those other nations I just listed who would actually have a finisher was Hungary. When runner Gyula Kellner would place 3rd after another Greek runner, who we just talked about, Spyridon Bellicus, was disqualified for apparently hitching a ride on a carriage for part of the course. So, Kellner, and here's why it's a big deal. I don't think we talked about this, Sarah, but Kellner had come in behind Bellicus by only 5 seconds. So, yeah, you better believe he put in that protest and was like, I am not taking 4th place by 5 seconds for a guy who jumped in a car for part of the way.
Yeah, so, I mean, you can't blame the guy.
So, yes. No, we're with Kellner on this 100%. So, even though they did not give third place a prize at that time. So even though he knew he wasn't going to get any accolades for it, I mean, he still wanted to make sure that that the cheater was exposed, and he prevented a Greek podium sweep by doing that. So the top 2 spots were taken by Kyrillios Vasilakos, who we talked about earlier, the winner of the first trial. So he came in second with a time of 3 hours, 6 minutes, and 3 seconds. So, hey, 12 minutes faster than his trial time. Way to go. And of course, spoiler alert, the subject of our episode, Spyridon Louis, an unknown peasant water carrier and soldier who completed the race in the first recorded sub 3 hour time, 2 hours, 58 minutes, and 50 seconds. Sarah, who was this underdog who won the whole thing? Well, we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to find out.
All right. I can't wait. Spyridon Louis was born on January 12th, 1873, which means he was 23 at the time of the Athens Games. He was born in the small town of Marasi, north of Athens, into a poor family of mixed Greek and Albanian heritage. And apparently Marasi was known as one of the poorest places in the whole country at that time. And today it's considered to be one of the best suburbs of Athens to live in. So that's pretty cool. They've come a far way. So because Athens lacked a central water system at that time, his father worked as a purveyor of mineral water. I really hope it was called Topo Greco. But anyway, funny joke there for you. Some sources identify Spiros as a water carrier, and likely that's because he worked for his dad, helping him transport the water to the markets for sale. Apparently, he was the pride of his dad because the two worked hard side by side, day and night, to earn as much as they could to support the entire family. So you got dad and son making things happen, carrying water, working hard. Other sources identify Spiros as a shepherd, but let's face it, that was pretty normal at that time in Greece if you lived out in the country like his family did. So shepherd, yes, lifestyle, but part of that along with being a water carrier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, like you just said, being a shepherd was just part of the lifestyle. I don't know that they would have considered that their job. Even if it did bring in some income, it was just part of how you live life, right? Mm-hmm. But at some point, and again, this is where things get a little hazy. We don't have all the details because of how long ago this was. But at some point, Spyridon joined the Greek army, and oh goodness, pray for me for the Greek name I'm about to have to pronounce.
You got this.
It is a doozy. Yeah. But Spyridon's commanding officer was a fellow by the name of Colonel Papadiamantopoulos. I think I got through that.
Great job.
Probably from now on, though, I'm probably just going to call him Colonel P from now on, because I don't know if I can keep doing that this entire episode. But the colonel was actually involved in organizing the trials for the marathon. When they decided to hold that second trial we were talking about earlier, it was apparently the colonel who encouraged Spiros to enter it. From one source that I found, it sounds like he had initially been a little bit reluctant to join in the trial, but that it was this encouragement from the colonel that gave him the confidence to actually go out there and give it a shot. So even though he came in fifth in that second trial, it apparently did give him a lot of confidence. In fact, according to GreeksChannel.com, yes, that's a real website, the way they wrote it was this way. He could engage in friendly interactions with friends and those who would participate in the big race, and confirm that he would overtake each one of them. His guts to grabbing victory were unstoppable. He was so determined to win that even his mentor, Papadiamantopoulos, was amazed by how excited Louis was. So, it sounds to me kind of like, he wasn't being cocky or anything like that, but he was just kind of like good old fashioned rivalry of like, whatever, you're going to be looking at my back during the race. Ha ha ha. Just kind of building some confidence, just kind of jibing at the others. I'm sure it was all in good fun from the sound of it. But according to Greek historian Demetres Masouras, Louis wasn't interested in athletic competition. He just wanted to win so he could impress the prettiest girl in Marousi, Helen. Now, I don't know. That's a little bit debatable, and we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit, because it sounds like maybe he was already engaged to her at the time that the race happened. But you can't blame a guy for wanting to throw in a little bit of romance into the story, right?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, remember, the girls, we weren't allowed to compete, so you might as well impress him since you're the star of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when he ran the race, and I thought this was... I thought this was fascinating, but Spyridon ran the marathon event wearing a fustanella, which is a traditional skirt-like garment. And I believe we've got a picture of that we're going to put up on Instagram. But for those of you who don't like social media, the best way I can describe it is it's a little bit like a kilt, not quite as thick in material, but that'll give you the right idea. So think about running for 25 miles wearing essentially a kilt. And also, he apparently didn't have a pair of sports shoes. So he had his boots that he would wear for doing work and, again, being in the military, but not a pair of athletic shoes. So I love this part of the story, Sarah. But the villagers from the town of Marousi, they came together and they pooled their money to buy a pair of shoes for him to use for the race. I mean, talk about supporting that local athlete.
I know. I love it. It's so good. Like, these are the things that give me warm fuzzies.
We got to talk about the race now. So we've teed up everything getting him to the race, but we need a play-by-play here.
Absolutely. So Spiros shows up with his shoes, his little donated shoes, on April 10th. So that's the day of the event. April 10th, there was a lot of pressure for the Greek runners since no Greek had won any of the other athletic events yet. And they had some surprise losses in discus and shot, which we had talked about, or in shot put. Here I am being all lazy with my language, but in shot put, which was like, that was painful. They were embarrassed. They were very disappointed. So to give you an idea of how important this particular race was to the Greeks, I want to reiterate a fun fact from the last episode, which is the fact that the wealthy Greek businessman, Georgios Averof, it's been a little bit since we've said his name, actually offered his daughter's hand in marriage and 1 million drachma dowry if a Greek man won that race. So we talked about in the last episode, it was a big deal. We still can't get over that because giving away your daughter's hand in marriage,
can't.
Plus all this money if a Greek man wins the race. It's, I don't know. I don't think I could do that. But let's do a little play-by-play of how the race actually went, because it sounds like it was quite the nail biter.
Yeah, it really does. I was amazed that I found the amount of details I did about the race, because you have to think about it. They didn't have cameras stationed along the route to document all of these things happening. So we're relying on information that came from firsthand witnesses who just happened to be along the course. So it's amazing that as much as we don't know that happened during those games, because the record keeping wasn't great, we actually know quite a bit about what happened during the race. And the marathon is not typically a nail biter type event, right? They usually kind of spread out over time and there's some space between the runners. But here's how it played out at the 1896 games. So Albin Lermiosus, a French runner and shooter, so he was also there for the shooting events, he took the early lead in the race with Australian Edwin Flack and American Arthur Blake, who, by the way, Edwin Flack and Arthur Blake, those two had gone first place and second place in the 1,500-meter race previously. Okay. But at this time, at the start of the marathon, they were sitting in second and third, and they stayed in those positions for a good chunk of the race. So, I mean, they had, you know, some clout in terms of longer distance and were ready to do the thing, honestly. But as the racers pounded down the dirt roads, dirt roads towards Athens, messengers on bicycles and horseback sprinted to the stadium in Athens with updates on how the race was going. So I don't know. I love that image, Sarah, because since they didn't have cameras, you've got these, you know, probably teenagers on bicycles. You've got these guys on their horses just riding to the stadium and just telling people, here's who's in first, here's who's in second. And I don't know. I need a visual of that, honestly. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, no, my thought when we were reading about this is, you know, our friends over at Keep the Flame Alive, they always like to talk about during the Olympics, what kind of officiating or volunteer job that you would like to have. And this is the job.
Yeah.
I want to be on horseback. If we're going back in time, take me to 1896. I want to be on horseback, going back and forth and yelling, this person's in the lead or this person's in second. Because by the time that I get there, who knows if that would even still be the case. But I feel like that would be such a fun and important job.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like it worked because you've got all these people sitting in the stadium and nothing's happening in the stadium at that time. So they're relying on this information and they're getting hyped up from it. So even though the runners aren't there, they're getting this information. And I don't know, it must have just been a really interesting experience. But also, I know we mentioned this in the previous episode, but I'm going to bring it up again because I think it's just a bonkers fact and it's worth mentioning again. But there were apparently no formal water stations set up like you would see in a marathon today. Instead, the marathon runners were apparently expected to purchase their refreshments from shops along the way. So, I don't know. I guess you just had to carry some cash in your pockets if you know, wanted to survive. And I just have to wonder, Sarah, like, how much of a heads up did they have to be able to be ready to carry money on their person? I don't know.
Yeah, or could it be that they carried, instead of money, that they could carry snacks? Like, were they allowed to do that? Bring their own? Or, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I know that the shops were there, but I don't know. Although you don't really want to carry food when you're running. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, so when I've run long distance races, I do carry food on me. I have a special belt for it, and I have my little pouch where I have a protein bar or something like that to snack on during the race. But
this is 1896.
But yeah, it's not like they had that back then.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I mean, whenever I've done marathons, I've done like the little gels and things like that to stay hydrated and fueled. Yeah. But yeah, considering what we're about to talk about as being the food of choice, I don't think it would be possible to carry this. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So some of the sources say that about 10 kilometers away from the finish line in a town called Pakirmi, Spiros stopped to eat an egg and quaff a glass of wine. I found another source, though, where his grandson vehemently argued against that story, saying, no, he didn't stop for wine. It was actually cognac. I mean, okay, whatever.
Either way.
It seems like either way, it seems like a funny distinction to get upset about, but, when it's your grandfather, I guess you want the story to be accurate. Now, other sources said that he had a glass of cognac after the race, that it was a drink he shared with his soon-to-be father-in-law. Whatever the case, I don't know, that little break that he took, it may have been the best thing he did. And, Sarah, it got me to thinking about some of the strange things that people do eat or drink during a marathon. I actually had a buddy who's run way more marathons than I have. I remember he used to keep a little bottle on him. He would have the belt with the different bottles, and I did too. But he would keep one that actually had beer in it. And the reason he did that is because it was such a good source of carbs. At least that was the reason he gave. Was that it was a way to carbo load during the race.
Interesting.
I don't know.
I hate beer, so to me that sounds terrible. But if it works for him, then that's great.
Yeah, I don't know that it worked for him all the time because I remember one of the races he and I were in together, which again, he was way more experienced than I was at marathons. And he did that at this particular marathon. He was carrying beer with him, and I blew him out of the water in that race. I think I beat him by a good 15 minutes, even though he had far more experience than I did. But yeah, I mean, I like a beer every now and then, but not while running.
No, well,
So.
And it is funny. Maybe you've had this experience when I've done halves and then the full, that there'll be like donut shops that come out and offer you donuts and pigs in a blanket and all kinds of stuff. And people stop and eat them, but I was like, no, thank you. Just give me the Gatorade.
Yeah, no, I have a pretty strict regimen when I do long races like that there's only certain things that I will eat or drink because my body during training has gotten accustomed to only eating or drinking those things. So yeah, I mean, good for Spiros eating that egg, getting some protein to help him get a second wind, I suppose. I'm not sure what the wine did for him other than just some good old spirits, pun unintended that time actually. But that's not normal for us. Usually it's very intentional. But anyway, let's get back to the race. We've talked enough about drinking, I think, for this episode.
Cheers.
Now, American Arthur Blake dropped out at the 23-kilometer mark. And Lermuseau, who we talked about earlier, the French runner who started out leading the race, he dropped out at the 32-kilometer point. So that left Aussie Edwin Flack in the lead. Now, around the 37-kilometer mark, Flack was simply unable to maintain his pace. He ended up dropping out of the race. And we still see this happen even at the Olympics today. We'll see runners get so close to the end and then their body just gives out. It just happens. And I don't think you really understand how that can happen until you run a marathon yourself. When I see that, I see people sometimes comment, I can't believe they stopped running. They were only 2 miles away. And I'm like, you've never run a marathon. If that's your perspective on it, you've never gone through what they are experiencing right now. And I never blame someone for dropping out because sometimes your body's just not in it.
Right.
And in my opinion, those last 6 miles of the marathon are just pure guts anyway. Your body's done at that point. For unless your name is Eliud Kipchoge, your body's done. At 20 miles, that's like the human limit, and then everything beyond that is just willpower and guts. So
they are
I don't blame anyone.
the longest miles ever.
They absolutely are. So anyway, so when Flack dropped out, our good old buddy Spiros, that's when he moved into the lead, just with a few kilometers left outside of the Panathenaic Stadium. All right, so we got to go back to the stadium now because we're so close to it. So inside and around the stadium, reports say that there were 80,000 to 100,000 fans who had come to see the finish of the race. And remember from the last episode, Sarah, we talked about how the stadium was only built for, what did we say, like 30,000 fans, was it? Something like that. So the fact that there were that many people packed in the area to see the end of this race, that gives you an idea of how important this race was to the Greek people. So
Yeah,
they're sitting there.
No pressure to the athletes.
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't know how many people were there.
Fair. I guess they had no idea going from one town to the other, but still.
Yeah, but still, yeah. I mean, and that actually makes it more amazing. He had no idea what was waiting for him when he got into that stadium. But anyway, so all these fans are sitting there in the stadium waiting for the finish. They're nervous because remember, with the bicyclers and the horse riders going back and forth, the last update that they had received was that Edwin Flack, the Australian, was in the lead. But then Spyridon enters the stadium, and when they realize that the leader of the race, who was about to finish in first place, that he was one of their own countrymen, the stadium filled with cries of Hellene, Hellene, which translates to a Greek, a Greek. And then, and I found this in a lot of sources, so it has to be true because there's a lot of consensus around this story, but a bunch of people just jumped out of the stands and actually joined Spiros on the track while he made the final lap to finish the race. So it was just the best kind of mayhem that you can imagine. People jumping onto
it's like
the race course to run alongside.
The field when you see a big football game and fans rush the field. It's like that, but
yeah,
the marathon version.
Yeah, and you know, bigger, because no one was stopping it. There was no security telling people to get back into their seat. They were letting it happen.
Well, and that has to be kind of scary.
So among the,
if you're Spiros, like I'd be like, what are they doing? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, but also knowing how tired you are at that point in the marathon, I don't know, maybe he thought he was even hallucinating a bit at that point. Yeah. Like, wait, is this real? Is this actually happening? Am I dying? What's going on right now? But among all of these fans that were caught up in the jubilation of the moment were the crown prince of Greece and his brother. So they both jumped onto the track to join Louis as he circled around the stadium before he crossed the finish line. And good old Pierre, we gotta throw a quote from him in here. So Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympic Games, he wrote about the race saying, "The excitement and the enthusiasm were simply indescribable. One of the most extraordinary sights that I can remember." And I mean, it does sound like it was epic. Sarah, can't you imagine that Coubertin, who had worked so hard to bring the games back, can you imagine how he was feeling at that moment, seeing that happening?
Probably really, really satisfying and everything that he could have hoped for.
Yeah.
The moment was also described in the official report of the games, which reads that the king rose from his seat and congratulated him most warmly on his success. Some of the king's aides-de-camp, that's how you say that, right? Aide-de-camp? I feel like that's how you say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Some of the king's aides-de-camp and several members of the committee went so far as to kiss and embrace the victor, who finally was carried in triumph to the retiring room under the vaulted entrance. The scene witnessed then inside the stadium cannot be easily described. Even strangers were carried away by the general enthusiasm. So, I mean, everyone has just lost their minds in the best kind of way. A video in our show notes even discussed how when King George greeted Louis after the race, he had tears in his eyes. He was so overcome with joy and pride for a Greek winning the race. So, I mean, the king straight up crying because he has so much pride in you, like kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Louis himself later recalled the moment in an interview saying, "That hour was something unimaginable, and it still appears to me in my memory like a dream. Twigs and flowers were raining down on me. Everybody was calling out my name and throwing their hats in the air." That's pretty special. Like, this is something that I just envisioned in a movie of everything just kind of being a dream. Like here in the United States, it's kind of a big deal when something happens and you get the ticker tape parade in New York and everything's raining down on you. It sounds like that on steroids of, you know, like he said, twigs and flowers and just so much adoration. And then everyone throwing their hats in the air.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about after the race. So he has this moment. Everything is wonderful.
Okay.
Now we're going to go after the race. As we just mentioned, King George greeted Louis after the race and granted him one wish. So I guess he's kind of like a genie. Of all the things he could have asked the king for, Spiros simply asked for a cart so that it would be easier for his dad to transport water to the city market, which I love that. I love that that was his wish.
Yeah, I mean, what, like, the most wholesome thing you could ask the king for? Like, you just won this race. The king just came up with tears in his eyes congratulating you and is like, I will give you anything you ask for. And he's like, can I get a cart for my dad so that he can carry water more easily?
No,
like, that's the thing you think of. I mean,
it's so sweet.
What a family man.
I know. I love him. In addition to the silver medal, olive branch, and diploma he received, like all the other Olympic champions, it's also reported that Louis received a silver cup from, even though we've been saying this name, Michel Brial. And other sources mentioned he was also given an antique ceramic bowl that dated back to the 6th century BC, showing an image of distance runners from the OG Olympics. This was given to him by Ioannis Lambros, who had served as an official during the games. So the guy walked away with a bunch of swag.
Yeah, absolutely. So he got a literal piece of history, a ceramic vase or bowl of some kind. Now, I found this in my research that the silver cup that he received was part of a Christie's auction in London during the 100-day countdown for the 2012 London Games, and it sold for $958,000, breaking the record for a piece of Olympic memorabilia being auctioned. Now, as for that ceramic bowl, no one knows where it is or where it ended up. So it's been kind of lost to history. No one knows if his family kept it, if it broke, if someone else took it. For all we know, it might be in the same storage room as the Ark of the Covenant, right?
My money's on the grandson that argued about the cognac.
I would hope so. I would hope that it stayed in the family.
Yeah.
But we don't know for sure what happened to
I also hope
that
they
piece
knew
of it.
that it was special and didn't just put it in the cabinet with the other dishes or something. That'd be so sad.
Yeah. Or turn it into like a flower pot or a dog bowl and like, oh, what's this piece of junk doing around here?
Looks old.
Oh man. Yeah. Anyway, his victory in this race was so unlikely. I mean, he really was an underdog, and we love a good underdog story here. I think most people do, but it was so unlikely that one source said he was actually later accused of cheating by the United States, France, and Australia. So I'm here to say shame on us, shame on France, and shame on Australia for accusing him of cheating. But here's the deal. Since the Greek officials were willing to disqualify one of their own runners, like we talked about earlier, which would have given them a podium sweep, that accusation sounds, I don't know. To me, it sounds more like jealousy than having any kind of real weight behind it. So anyway, so Louis became an instant national hero, obviously. Over time, I mean, everyone in the country knew him by this point, and so he got showered with jewelry, people gave him money, he received some sheep and a herd of cows, and I don't know, this may be the best of all. This may be the best prize I've ever heard of. He was offered a lifetime of free shaves from a barber. So, that's something.
That's pretty sweet. That is pretty sweet.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how much he took advantage of that or would want to, because everyone will see this in the pictures of him, but he had a pretty sweet mustache. I mean, like, he and Kubertan could have gone, mustache to mustache in terms of, quality. So while some sources say that he was already engaged to be married, as we mentioned before, to Helen from his hometown, either way, they did get married. So yes, he won the race and he got the girl too. So if you were really hoping for there to be that romantic angle, we'll let you have it. Okay.
Okay. So thinking about this guy from like just being encouraged to try out for this marathon, to deciding this might be a way to impress women, to becoming this huge hero and getting all like
a woman,
a woman, one woman. I should say that he gets his woman. He gets set for life, basically. Gotta say, what a good guy to motivate our buddy here, Spiros. Talking about the Colonel P. What a guy to encourage his little buddy. Hey, I think you're good at this. So yeah, what a guy. I feel like he deserved some kind of award for giving Greece the gift of Spiros as a competitor.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it goes to show what a little encouragement will do, because think about this. The most we know about Spiros's life is that 3 hours that he ran a race. That race literally changed his life and what it looked like from there on out. And so we think about this with the modern games or modern Olympiads now. We think about how a lot of these athletes, especially from other countries, their lives do get changed when they become a champion. And a lot of times for the better. They go back heroes, they go back being able to make an impact on their communities. And I mean, that started here with Spyridon Louis. And in fact, that's a perfect segue for talking about his legacy. So here's the deal. He remained famous in Greece throughout his life. Now, unfortunately, here's the one kind of dark cloud in the story. It wasn't always for the best reasons. After the Olympics, he never raced again, which is fine. I mean, by all means, go out on top. I totally get that. He just went back to making his living by farming. Some sources said that he also became a police officer for a while. And then other sources said that he just went right back to helping his dad with the mineral water business. So, he wasn't one of those people who had to find some quote unquote big thing to do with his life after that. He was content, which I think is the best thing you can be. He was content to farm and kind of live a little bit quieter life and enjoy his fame quietly and, fairly modestly. But here's the deal. He lost that job, that is being a police officer, in 1926 when he was actually arrested on charges of falsifying some military records. And he actually spent a year in prison for that. Now, eventually he was acquitted during his trial, which happened on June 28th, 1927. But I mean, it's just kind of hard to know whether that's because he was actually not guilty or whether the judge thought that it was just an honest mistake he had made, or whether it was just because he was such a popular guy that helped him get released. Either way, if he was guilty, I hope he wasn't, because I really like him. But we all make mistakes, and I guess if he was guilty of doing some type of forgery, they must have felt like 1 year in prison. I mean, the guy's learned his lesson. Just let him go, essentially. But But yeah, I tried to find more about this trial and why exactly he was acquitted, and I just couldn't find anything specific about the reason why. So, it's a little bit of a dark cloud on his legacy, but, who can cast the first stone is is how I'm going to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I thought this was really fascinating because I had never heard this part of his story before doing the research for this episode. But the last public appearance that he ever made was in 1936 when he was invited by the Berlin Olympic Committee to come to the Berlin Games. And he accepted that invitation. So when he went there, he met Adolf Hitler during the start of the Games. And Hitler actually gave him an olive wreath branch that came from the site of Olympia. And he was showered with praise there from the local audience. And we've kind of briefly alluded to this in a previous episode, but, the German people love the Olympics. And that's always been true. So, seeing the first winner of the marathon there in the stadium at the games next to Adolf Hitler, their leader at the time, the crowd went wild, essentially. So, unfortunately, looking back, that's not great that was his last public appearance, but kind of like we've mentioned before, hindsight is 2020. Mm-hmm. And, who knows how much he knew about Hitler or the Nazis. As far as we know, he was like, cool, a free trip to Berlin? Yeah, I'll go. We don't know.
Right.
But anyway, he died on March 26th, 1940. He was 67 years old, and he died just months before Italy would invade and take over Greece during World War II. So, I have mixed feelings about that. I guess I'm kind of glad that he didn't see that happen to his country, but obviously it's a shame just what was going on in Europe at the time, there at the end of his life. Now to more fun things with his legacy. It's apparently still an expression in Greece to become Louis, which means to disappear by running fast. I love that phrase. I don't think it translates as well here.
Well, no, but I want to, I've got some friends down the street who are Greek. If you're listening, hello, friends. But
yeah,
I'm just going to casually slip this in one day and see if they catch it.
Yeah, because I guess I
should learn it in
but
Greek.
When I found this in the research, it was in Greek, but it had the translation. So I was like, yeah, I don't need to butcher any more Greek in this episode than what I have to. So I'm just going to read the English translation. But yeah, you should go learn it in Greek. But I love that. So to become Louis means you need to get out of there quick. you need to disappear real fast. Also, this is kind of funny. His story helped inspire a less than historically accurate movie called It Happened in Athens, which stars Jane Mansfield, who, very famous actress here in the US from back in the day. And in that movie, Mansfield plays a famous Greek actress who, for the sake of publicity, offers herself in marriage to whoever wins the marathon. But then Spiros in the movie chooses the girl next door to be his bride. It's kind of a cheesy movie. I did watch it, and you can watch the entire movie on YouTube if you really want to and you have that kind of time. Have you heard of this movie, Sarah?
Not before you were researching this, so no, not before now.
Yeah, here's what I would say. It should not be at the top of anyone's list for going to go watch, but it is kind of interesting too. So anyway, a slightly more accurate version of Spyridon's story is included in the NBC miniseries, The First Olympics, Athens 1896, which you can also watch in full on YouTube. But even that version is kind of disappointing because just like with Coubertin, the actor playing Spiros has no facial hair, which is just a crime because, as I mentioned a second ago, the real-life Louis had quite the epic mustache. So I don't know why NBC from the 1980s was so anti-mustache, but
I know that
there you have
this one really gets you because, yeah,
it does.
I mean, and I'm on your side. I'm on your team here, but yeah, I know that this has been the biggest point of grievance, I suppose, for that documentary is the lack of facial hair.
Yeah, it's a shame. Well, and it's such an easy thing. Like, you don't even have to have an actor who has a mustache. Just slap one on their face.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we have makeup departments for.
Yeah.
But anyway,
agreed.
Yeah, we'll move on. Now, the 2004 Athens Stadium that was used for the games, for the opening ceremony, closing ceremony, the athletics events. That stadium was actually built in his hometown of Marousi, and it was named after him. So that's a fun part of his legacy, is that they paid homage to him in the 2004 games. And as you mentioned earlier, what's really cool is that Marousi, which was at one point one of the poorest villages in the town, is a thriving community today and a place that people want to live. So, you know, I have to think part of that was because of his fame and people wanted to check out where the great Spyridon Louis was from. And we're like, hey, this village is actually really lovely. They band together and they buy you shoes. Like, let's live here. It's a wonderful place. And as we kind of already mentioned, the same route was used in 2004 for the marathon at those games, but it was lengthened to the modern 26.2 mile standard. He will always be the first marathon champion, and that's something no one can ever take away from him. And so there you have it. That is the story of Spyridon Louis. And, you know, even though many other great marathoners have come along since him, again, he's always going to be that Olympic champion. He's always going to be that Greek champion. He was a big deal, and he's worth remembering, I think. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more of these athlete profiles as we go through the games, because I think it's fun to highlight people from different countries and their unique accomplishments. You know, too bad we can't give everyone a profile just because we don't have time to cover everyone. But I'm looking forward to doing more of these. If you enjoyed this episode,
and we really hope you did,
then we hope you just take a second to rate and review the show, even if all that you write in the review is, hey, it's not the worst podcast ever. I will agree with you on that one. But writing those reviews, it really does help us out a lot, and we would appreciate it. But until next time, when we go to 1900 Paris, Odyssey you later. The Games Odyssey podcast is a production of Wardrobe Media, LLC. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jonathan Jordan, and co-hosted by Sarah Patton. Show notes, including research sources and transcripts, can be found on our website, gamesodyssey.com. Olympic is a trademark of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC. Any use of Olympic in the Games Odyssey podcast is strictly for informational, commentary, and educational purposes. The Games Odyssey podcast is not an official podcast of the USOPC and is not sponsored, endorsed, or officially affiliated with the USOPC or the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. The content of Games Odyssey podcast does not reflect the opinions, standards, views, or policies of the USOPC, and the USOPC in no way warrants that content featured in the Games Odyssey podcast is accurate.